Picture this. The year is 2525. Jeff Bezos is blowing out his 1000th birthday candles. Still bald, of course, but sporting a lab-grown liver fresher than your new iPhone battery. Peter Thiel is debating politics with his third clone. Sergey Brin is jogging his morning miles at age 600. Meanwhile, you, or rather your great-great-grandchildren, are wheezing their way through an ordinary 80th birthday with dentures and arthritis. Welcome to Immortality Incorporated, the most profitable business in history, quite literally. And no, this isn't a Black Mirror pitch. It's a true story. Some of the world's richest men have decided death is no longer inevitable. To them, it's a bug. And when Silicon Valley sees a bug, it raises billions, launches a startup, and promises to fix reality. The idea is simple. Why die when you can update? You're no longer a mortal being. You're a beta version waiting for its next patch. And if it fails, no problem. Backup plan. Freeze yourself in a giant fridge right next to a pepperoni pizza and a tub of Ben & Jerry's until the scientists of tomorrow figure out how to defrost you without turning you into soup. Absurd? Wait until you hear the receipts. Because here's the chilling question. What if, in the near future, the real currency wasn't gold, oil, or even Bitcoin, but years of life? Imagine a world where the wealthy hoard extra decades the way they hoard stock options, while everyone else keeps dying on schedule. And this isn't science fiction. Google created an entire biotech company, Calico, with one mission: cure death. Jeff Bezos has poured billions into Altos Labs, a startup recruiting Nobel Prize-winning scientists to reprogram cells and reverse aging. Peter Thiel? He's already signed up for cryonics. If the labs can't save him alive, they'll freeze his body for a future resurrection. And then there's Brian Johnson, the millionaire biohacker who turned his own body into Silicon Valley's most ambitious experiment. He sold his company, poured millions into his project called Blueprint, and now tracks every heartbeat, every calorie, every hour of sleep with near-military precision. His most talked about stunt? Plasma transfusions from his teenage son, a move that made headlines faster than a Tesla recall. But to his credit, Johnson isn't some cartoon villain. He genuinely funds research, shares his data publicly, and promotes exercise, nutrition, and discipline with almost monk-like dedication. Maybe he's not crazy. Maybe he's just the most extreme version of a universal instinct, the human refusal to fade away. And honestly, he's not alone. Silicon Valley is full of brilliant minds trying to outsmart biology. And a few who might just live long enough to make fun of the rest of us. Sure, it's hilarious. Imagine Elon Musk tweeting at age 400, still alive, still late to Mars. But behind the absurdity lies a deeply human truth. When you already have everything, power, yachts, private rockets, there's only one thing left to want: more time, the continuation of the game. And that's where this story really begins. Because what they're chasing isn't just a billionaire's ego trip. It's the most primal fear of all. The fear of dying. Your fear, my fear. The same terror that built pyramids, inspired myths, and now funds billion-dollar startups. No one likes the end credits. So get ready. In this episode, we'll dive into the strange origins of transhumanism, the wildest and most unhinged experiments, the scandals they don't want you to know about, and the mind-bending projects of billionaires who are convinced they'll be around long after you're gone. And before we step deeper into the vault of borrowed time, let me tell you what we do here on Crazy Science Stories. We don't do boring science. We make the wildest breakthroughs and the craziest mistakes. Understandable, hilarious, and a little terrifying. Think Netflix documentary with jokes. So hit subscribe. It won't make you immortal, but it might add a few extra minutes of joy to your week, which, let's be honest, is a better deal than a teenager's blood transfusion. Because here's the real hook. What if death isn't an ending at all, but just a bug waiting for its patch? To understand how we got here, billionaires signing up to freeze themselves like popsicles, you have to rewind to the 1980s. Back then, computers were still beige bricks. The internet was a whisper on university campuses, and the dream of defeating death was mostly the stuff of science fiction. Enter Ray Kurzweil, inventor, futurist, Google's resident prophet. If Silicon Valley has a high priest, it's him. Kurzweil has spent decades predicting the future with eerie accuracy. Speech recognition, the rise of the internet, even when computers would beat humans at chess. But his boldest prophecy, that humanity is on the cusp of transcending biology altogether. Kurzweil coined the idea of the singularity, the moment when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, fuses with us, and catapults us into a post-human future. In this vision, death is no longer destiny. It's an obstacle. As he once declared, death is a technical problem, and technical problems can be solved. Kurzweil doesn't just talk the talk. The man swallows around 150 pills a day in a bizarre ritual of vitamins, supplements, and experimental drugs. It's not breakfast, it's an arms race against time. His goal? Stay alive long enough for technology to catch up and make him immortal. In his worldview, it's not about heaven or the afterlife. It's about surviving until the upload. Upload what, you ask? Your brain. Kurzweil and his followers believe that within decades we'll be able to scan the human mind like a PDF, upload it to a computer, and live forever in digital form. Your thoughts, your memories, your personality. All preserved, like a cosmic hard drive backup. Of course, critics point out the obvious. What if someone forgets to click Save As? Or worse, what if your immortal consciousness ends up trapped inside a Windows 95 emulator? Still, in the techno-optimistic haze of the 80s and 90s, the idea caught fire. The transhumanist movement emerged, a blend of sci-fi fans, eccentric scientists, and futurists who insisted the human body was outdated hardware. Why accept wrinkles, disease, and death when you could just upgrade? Think of it as humanity's unofficial patch notes. Back then, it all seemed fringe. Crazy conferences, photocopied manifestos, nerdy debates in hotel basements. But Silicon Valley was listening, because who better to buy into the dream of infinite life than the guys already building infinite money machines? By the early 2000s, a new generation of tech elites had grown up on Star Trek, cyberpunk novels, and Ray Kurzweil's books. They weren't content to just disrupt taxis or social media. They wanted to disrupt death itself. And unlike Kurzweil's pill-popping regime, they had something else. Cash. Mountains of it. Suddenly, transhumanism wasn't just a fringe philosophy. It was a business plan, a startup pitch, a potential IPO. What's our exit strategy? Asked the VCs. Simple. Don't exit. Ever. It's easy to laugh at the early days, the talk of mind uploads, cyborg futures, and digital heavens. But remember, these were the same circles that predicted the smartphone, the internet economy, even self-driving cars. And as absurd as immortality sounds, they began to treat it like the next logical step. Of course, The human side of this story is easy to overlook. Behind the tech jargon and venture capital, it's the same raw universal desire. Nobody wants to die. It's not just billionaires, it's everyone. The only difference is that Kurzweil had a microphone and Silicon Valley had the money to bet on his vision. So by the dawn of the 21st century, something radical had shifted. Death wasn't just feared, it was being rebranded. It wasn't fate, it was a bug. And in the Valley, bugs get patched. But there was a problem. Talking about immortality is easy. Selling books about it is profitable. Convincing billionaires to invest is even better. Actually stopping death, that's a little trickier. Which brings us to the next chapter, the experiments. Because at some point, theory wasn't enough. Someone had to roll up their sleeves, grab a syringe, and start tinkering with the machinery of life. And as you'll see, the results were equal parts groundbreaking and absolutely unhinged. Ideas are cheap. PowerPoints are easy. Even manifestos about living forever can be printed at Kinko's. But at some point, someone has to actually test the theory. Someone has to grab a petri dish, pour billions into a lab, and start tinkering with the machinery of life. That's when immortality stopped being philosophy and became a business experiment. Let's start with the quiet giant, Calico. In 2013, Google announced it was launching a mysterious company dedicated to nothing less than curing death. The press went wild. Curing death? Really? That's like announcing you're opening a bakery to cure hunger forever. Calico quickly became Silicon Valley's most secretive biotech. Billions of dollars, Nobel Prize winners on the payroll, and a mission statement so audacious it sounded like science fiction. More than a decade later, it still operates mostly in silence. Its breakthroughs, if any, kept under wraps. Which only fuels the rumours. What exactly are they cooking behind those locked doors? Then came Altos Labs, backed by none other than Jeff Bezos himself. If Calico is secretive, Altos is flashy. It raised billions in funding and recruited some of the most famous scientists in the world, including Shinya Yamanaka, who won a Nobel Prize for discovering how to reprogram cells. The dream? Reverse aging at the cellular level. Imagine rolling back your biological clock like clicking undo on Microsoft Word. Wrinkles gone. Organs renewed. A total system reboot. Bezos, who reportedly has an almost pathological fear of dying, wants to make sure his empire doesn't end when his body does. After all, prime delivery doesn't mean much if the founder expires. But the experiments don't stop at respectable labs. Enter Unity Biotechnology, a startup obsessed with senescent cells, the zombie cells in your body that refuse to die and clog up your system. These cells contribute to aging, inflammation, and disease. Kill the zombies, the theory goes, and the body rejuvenates. Sounds like a great pitch. Investors agreed. At one point, Unity was worth nearly $1 billion. Clinical trials, however, proved disappointing. Turns out killing the zombies without also killing everything else is harder than it looks. Immortality, it seems, doesn't come in beta release. And then we have the Silicon Valley eccentric who decided to skip the lab and use himself as a guinea pig, Brian Johnson. Once a millionaire entrepreneur, Johnson sold his company and decided his new mission was to conquer death. His approach? A radical regimen called the Blueprint. Johnson spends millions a year tracking every metric of his body, swallowing handfuls of supplements and injecting himself with experimental treatments. But his most infamous stunt? Receiving plasma transfusions from his teenage son. Yes, you heard that right. Johnson literally siphoned off the youthful essence of his child, hoping it would rejuvenate his own body. A high-tech, real-world version of Dracula, except instead of a gothic castle, it's a sterile Silicon Valley clinic with Wi-Fi. Scientists, to be fair, have studied whether young blood can rejuvenate older organisms. There's some evidence in mice, but in humans, the results are murky at best. What's clear is that Brian Johnson turned himself into a meme. The vampire biohacker who drinks his son's youth like an energy drink. And he's not alone. Other wealthy biohackers experiment with cryotherapy, standing half naked in nitrogen chambers colder than Antarctica. Some microdose experimental drugs. Others test gene editing therapies years before they're proven safe. The line between brave pioneers and eccentric mad scientists blurs more every year. Here's the dark comedy of it all. Most of these experiments fail. Or worse, they yield results so ambiguous you could interpret them however you want. Did Brian Johnson's transfusions work? Probably not. Did Unity's trials rejuvenate anyone? Not really. Did Calico and Altos Labs cure death? Not yet. But failure doesn't scare billionaires. They can afford to fail 100 times. After all, what's a few $1 billion when you're buying the chance at eternity? And the money keeps pouring in. Why? Because the prize is too tempting. Whoever cracks the code of aging won't just get rich. They'll control the most valuable commodity in history, time itself. There's something hauntingly human here. Strip away the labs, the billions, the sci-fi jargon, and what you see are people terrified of dying. Just like us. The only difference is that when you or I panic about mortality, we buy a gym membership or maybe a better face cream. When they panic, they bankroll a Nobel laureate to reprogram their DNA. But here's where the story takes a sharp turn. Because experiments, however wild, are only half the game. The real drama begins when science collides with money, ego, and the relentless inequality of our age. Because if death is a business problem, then life becomes a commodity. And in this world, not everyone gets to buy in. Which raises the question, what happens when time itself becomes the currency of the future? Who gets rich and who gets left to die on schedule? By now, the dream of cheating death had escaped the lab. It wasn't just eccentric scientists or billionaire hobbyists anymore. It was becoming an industry. Websites, contracts, brochures with glossy promises. Defy aging. Invest in your future? Immortality was no longer a philosophical debate. It was a product. And like any product, the question was simple. Who can afford it? Spoiler. Not you. Not me. Not 99.9% of humanity. Because here's the ugly truth. The deeper billionaires sank their billions into longevity, the clearer it became that time itself was being privatized. Think about it. Money has always bought comfort. The rich already live longer. Better doctors, safer neighborhoods, organic food instead of dollar store noodles. But now, they're not just buying nicer lives, they're buying longer ones. Literally. As historian Yuval Noah Harari warned, once technology makes it possible to extend life indefinitely, we risk splitting humanity into two castes, the immortals and the mortals. Imagine that. One humanity, but two calendars. For the wealthy, birthdays just keep coming. 100, 200, 500. For everyone else, the countdown stops at the usual 60, 70, 80. Death on schedule. It's hard not to see the dystopia. Picture a future bank. Instead of applying for a mortgage, you apply for 30 extra years. Imagine Wall Street trading in time instead of oil or stocks. Apple gains plus 10 years of lifespan futures while Meta crashes back to mortal status. Absurd? Maybe. But remember, just a century ago, the idea of editing DNA or cloning sheep sounded absurd too. Today, billionaires are pouring billions into exactly this gamble. Why? Because time is the ultimate monopoly. Control it, and you don't just own the market, you own existence. And the implications are terrifying. Let's say Bezos lives to 500. Do you really think he's stepping down from Amazon? Picture dictators who never age, politicians who never die, CEOs who never retire. The boardrooms of the future might look like nursing homes, except with eternal billionaires calling the shots while the rest of us keep dying on schedule. Humor helps, but the reality is dark. Imagine being stuck with the same president for 300 years. Elections would feel like Netflix renewals. Season 47 of the same guy, kill me now. The idea of waiting for the next generation loses all meaning when the same people hog the future forever. But here's the kicker. While billionaires extend their lives, the rest of us pay the price. Already, the global poor died decades earlier. Already, time is unequal. If immortality tech becomes real and expensive, this gap becomes a canyon. The rich will quite literally live in another timeline, while the poor are disposable, not metaphorically, biologically. And yet, for all the dystopian doom, there's a strangely human side to it. Strip away the suits and the secrecy, and you find the same raw fear that drives us all. Billionaires aren't evil sorcerers. They're just people with more money than sense, terrified of the same thing you fear when you wake at night. The end, the void, nothingness. That's the paradox. Immortality is marketed as futuristic, but at its core, it's as ancient as the pyramids. Pharaohs built tombs to cheat death. Alchemists searched for the elixir of life. Today's billionaires are just doing it with better Wi-Fi. The tools change. The fear doesn't. Still, the consequences are unlike anything humanity has faced before. Because this time, it might actually work. At least for some. And if it does, society fractures. The poor will die. The rich will not. And time, once the most universal human experience, becomes a privilege. So here we stand at the cliff edge of history. On one side, the dream of beating death, a world where humanity conquers its oldest enemy. On the other, a nightmare where eternity belongs to a few, and mortality is left for the many. And here's the chilling twist. It may already be happening. Right now, as you listen to this, billionaire money is funding the labs, paying for the patents, hoarding the future. The first immortal may already have been born. Maybe they're living quietly in California, sipping kombucha, waiting for science to catch up. The question is, will you be there too? Or will you, like the rest of us, be left to expire on schedule, while eternity becomes the ultimate luxury product? So, let's imagine the future. Not in vague sci-fi blur, but in cold neon detail. What actually happens if Silicon Valley wins its war against death? Scenario 1, the Utopia pitch deck. In this version, nanotechnology is so advanced that swarms of microscopic robots crawl through your body, repairing cells one by one like tiny construction crews. Wrinkles? Gone. Organs? Rebuilt. Your brain? Polished like a hard drive. Cancer becomes a distant memory. Alzheimer's a footnote in history. Humanity lives not to 80 but to 200, 300, maybe more. Imagine celebrating your 300th birthday with perfect skin, a fresh liver, and another century on the horizon. It sounds magical. Diseases vanish. Families span 10 generations at once. Imagine asking Grandma for advice when Grandma is 200 years old and still bench pressing at the gym. The dream is seductive. A future where science rewrites the human condition, giving us time not just to live, but to truly flourish. Now, scenario 2, the dystopia update. In this version, the rich monopolize immortality. They lock it up behind patents, clinics, and billion-dollar treatments. The world fractures into immortals and mortals. A two-tier humanity. Imagine a world where Jeff Bezos doesn't just own your data or your shopping habits. He literally owns more time than you. Years become assets. Decades become commodities. The rich live in shining longevity enclaves, while everyone else dies on schedule. And the side effects? Terrifying. Overpopulation, drained resources, governments unable to support endless citizens. Imagine dictators who never step down, ruling for centuries. Imagine the same billionaires, the same politicians, the same families hoarding power for half a millennium. Democracy was fragile enough at 4-year terms. Try 400. Humour aside, this scenario isn't even that far-fetched. We already live in a world where wealth buys time. Better healthcare, longer lives, private hospitals. This would just crank that inequality up to a cosmic level. The most chilling thought: the poor wouldn't just be excluded from luxury, they'd be excluded from the future itself. And then there's scenario 3, the weird zone. Imagine uploading your mind into a machine, as Ray Kurzweil predicted. You're no longer flesh, you're data. Your body dies, but your thoughts, your memories, your personality live on in a server farm somewhere in Nevada. You can chat with your great-great-grandkids as a hologram. You can attend your own funeral via Zoom. Sounds amazing until the server crashes. Or worse, someone hacks your immortal consciousness and installs Candy Crush as your default operating system. And let's not forget the absurd version. Imagine waking up in the year 2500 after centuries in cryogenic sleep, only to discover humanity finally cured aging, but also banned chocolate. Or that Wi-Fi is still terrible. Congratulations, you've lived 500 years for nothing. The truth is, no one knows which version is coming. Some scientists are optimistic. They point out that people laughed at organ transplants, IVF, even antibiotics. Yesterday's science fiction is today's medicine. Who's to say immortality won't follow the same path? Others are skeptical, pointing out the brutal fact: so far, no experiment has ever reversed aging in humans. At best, we've stretched a few lifespans. At worst, we've created headlines about billionaires paying for teenage blood. But maybe the real question isn't can we do it? Maybe it's should we do it? Because defeating death isn't just about biology, it's about meaning. Death gives life urgency. It gives our choices weight. It tells us to love now, to act today, to live fully, because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. If you live forever, does joy still feel urgent? Does love still feel precious? Or does everything become an endless Tuesday? That's the paradox of immortality. The dream is intoxicating. No endings, no goodbyes. Infinite tomorrows. But without endings, do tomorrows even matter? Philosophers have warned for centuries that death is what sculpts life, the shadow that gives form to light. Without it, life may stretch longer, but grow emptier. So here we are, staring at the future, Utopia, dystopia, absurdity, all on the table. Billionaires are betting billions that immortality is within reach, but whether it saves us or destroys us, that's still unwritten. Which leaves one final, haunting question. What if immortality doesn't give us more life, only more time to realize how little we know what to do with it? Death has always been humanity's ultimate antagonist. Long before Silicon Valley coded apps or built rockets, pharaohs built pyramids to cheat it, emperors drank elixirs chasing it, and poets wrote verses to soften it. Immortality isn't new, it's just wearing a hoodie now. But there's something both absurd and beautiful about the image of today's immortality projects. Think about it. The richest men on Earth, paying fortunes to hang upside down in cryogenic tanks, transfuse their veins with teenage plasma, or swallow mountains of supplements. They aren't superheroes. They aren't gods. They're humans. Scared, fragile, desperate. Just like us. The only difference is their wallets. And isn't that the ultimate irony? When you've conquered every industry, every market, every frontier, the one enemy you can't buy off is the Reaper. No amount of yachts, rockets, or stock options can negotiate with silence. So what do you do when you've already bought everything? You try to buy tomorrow, but immortality is a slippery gift. Would living forever be paradise or purgatory? A life with no endings, no urgency, no reason to seize the day. Imagine birthdays that never stop, relationships that drag for centuries, ambition that evaporates because you've got infinite tomorrows. Without death, does anything still matter? Or does everything dissolve into an endless Tuesday? Philosophers have been warning us for centuries. As Nietzsche wrote, only through death does life gain its weight. Without the shadow of an ending, joy loses its urgency. Love loses its fire. Strangely enough, the very thing we run from, death, is what makes life precious. And yet, the dream won't die. Even if the odds are slim, even if the science is shaky, even if it all looks absurd, there will always be those willing to gamble everything for more time. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the vampire jokes and sci-fi labs, lies the most human truth of all. We want to live. Longer, better, endlessly. Maybe immortality is a blessing, maybe it's a curse, or maybe it's just another business model, another way to turn fear into profit. The future will tell us. But one thing is certain. As you're listening to this, hundreds of bodies already lie frozen in steel tanks. Billion-dollar labs are burning through cash, and billionaires are still popping pills and signing contracts to buy what none of us can buy: time. So the question isn't just, can they do it? The question is, what happens if they can? Do we enter a golden age where humanity thrives for centuries? Or a nightmare where eternity belongs only to the rich and the rest of us keep dying on schedule? And maybe the most chilling question of all, do we actually want to live forever? Or is the chase itself, the refusal to accept the end, what makes us human in the first place? So here we are, staring into the strangest mirror in human history. It doesn't reflect the future. It reflects us, our fear, our hope, our absurd need to stretch life past its natural borders. So, immortals in waiting, or just overpriced ice cubes in a very fancy freezer. And you, what do you think? Would you take the gamble? Would you pay for eternity? Does the idea of billionaires living forever worry you, intrigue you, excite you, or depress you about humanity's future? Because maybe the real question isn't about defeating death at all, but about what truly gives life its meaning. And maybe, before we spend billions chasing eternity. We should ask why so many people still don't even have enough to live one single lifetime with dignity. But then again, this is humanity. We've always preferred chasing immortality over fixing the suffering right in front of us. And honestly, that's what makes us so fascinating, so ridiculous, and so worth studying. Because in the end, our obsession with forever might just be another way of saying we're afraid to waste the little time we do have. So enjoy your moment, your breath, your perfectly mortal heartbeat. And we'll see you soon for another dive into the wild, weird, and wonderful world of crazy science stories.